Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We will give just another minute or two to let a few more people jump on, and then we will get started. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Welcome to today's webinar, The Speed Paradox: Why Moving Faster in MedTech Often Slows You Down. My name is Jen Osborne with MassMEDIC, and I would like to give a special thank you to our sponsor, Suntra MedTech Solutions. Before we dive in, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and we will be sharing that with you in the next day or so. Feel free to submit any questions using the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will address as many as we can at the live Q&A at the end. We have a great program for you today. And with that, I will turn it over to Bryan Gilpin, President of Suntra MedTech Solutions, to kick it off.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Looks like we got quite a few people out there. So very excited to be here with you today and really excited about the program that we have today. So my name is Bryan Gilpin. I'm the president of Suntra MedTech Solutions, and we're going to be talking about a very special topic that I think probably resonates with a lot of you out there, and that's the speed paradox, why moving faster in MedTech often slows you down. And I think that's typical. We all see it in the R&D engineering community. Certainly at Suntra MedTech, that's something that we face very directly. I'd say most of our clients come to us because they want to go faster, they want to do something sooner, they want to accelerate, do something more than what they were originally capable or could do. And so we face this all the time. But I want to turn or talk about our special guest, who I'm very excited to have, um, Terri Kapur. And if you don't mind, Terri, I'll introduce you. You can correct me for anything I misstate. Um, so very, very honored to have Terri join this conversation. Terri, I know a lot of R&D leaders, and Terri in particular brings just a wealth of background from all different angles of different types of medtech products. She started her career earlier at J&J. She's been with Covidien. She went over to orthopedics with Smith and Nephew, then over to monitoring with Baxter. And actually, before that, I should say that where we had a little bit of overlap, Terri, at the Boston Scientific as well. And then most recently with Laborie. And the great thing is that she has lived this whole paradox in multiple forms, multiple different types of groups, multiple different cultures, and literally around the world. And so this is a great topic to have Terri talk about some more. So with no further ado, Terri, why don't we dive in?
Yeah, thank you,
Oh,
Bryan, and that's a great introduction. And I'm here, and I'm really excited about this.
great. Okay, well, so we will start off by first just kind of talking a little bit about what we mean by the paradox, and then we'll get Terri into some of your thoughts about how you think about managing through it, and then maybe getting some examples of what you faced.
Yep.
So, as you know, every medtech leader is under pressure to move faster, but across the industry, we see the paradox. The harder organizations push for speed, and we see that all the time, the more they can unintentionally slow themselves down. And today we want to unpack what's really happening underneath the go faster mandate and what it takes to build sustainable speed. I think that's the key, is building an organization that consistently delivers innovation quickly. So Terri, when leaders say we need to move faster, what do you think they often misunderstand about what actually create speed in product development?
Yeah, as you mentioned in the introduction, I've been in a lot of different companies. I like to say that I've been doing R&D since the late 1900s. So so because of I have this, I can frame this up in like the pre-COVID, post-COVID era because I think it illustrates the point a little bit. There were a lot of these things going on before COVID, but COVID really like made it. You could really see the chinks about what was going wrong in the armor there. And, before COVID, people were generally together. The engineering teams were co-located. Supply chains were fairly, reliable. And so if you think about, the kinds of projects that R&D teams had to work on, they were together. They were solving problems together. They knew where their next, sources were coming from. The regulatory environment was pretty straightforward. If you think about what happened after COVID, nobody was in the same office anymore. So trust was lost. The chip crisis came, when you couldn't get when the emergency order from the US government ended and no longer could you really buy chips from the major manufacturers anymore. So R&D teams were trying to figure out how to redesign. It was very distracting. And then MDR, this massive change with MDR has really put a lot of effort. The engineers have to put a lot of effort into stuff they weren't expecting. So what that comes down to is prioritization. Are people really working on what you think they're working on? Training starts to decline. There's just so many things that went wrong after that because now nobody's together. You don't have mentorship. And then you start seeing unexpected results. So now your projects are slowing down because you don't have people working on what they need to work on and they don't know how to solve the problems, perhaps. But the broad generalizations, that's kind of what I saw.
Yeah, and for sure. And it's interesting the kind of the pre-COVID, post-COVID that we've all
Yeah,
seen and trying to adapt to somewhat more virtual world. Although now I think we're a little more back in the office
it's
than we
getting
were
better.
before,
Yeah,
which gets better. Yeah.
yeah.
But you've led R&D teams and worked through the realities of product development from the inside. When you look back across different programs and all the different programs you've had, what would you say separated the teams that actually moved quickly from the teams that only felt, say, busy or urgent?
Yeah, I can be really specific, I think, because it's been so many years. And, there was this idea of agile teams, for software that's come up long ago. And everyone understands that if you're in software, that you have to, develop your software as an agile team and then have these integration points where everyone gets together to see how well things are going. And people that have mastered, generally speaking, that are doing really well. On the hardware side or even the implant side, it was also about being agile by being co-located. So Boston Scientific is well known for its innovation, as you know that, and I know that, and anybody who's there knows that. It's a great company. And one of the things that we did, I was in endoscopy. We actually co-located R&D teams with manufacturing sites. And so we had a really great upstream marketing organization that was good at finding requirements of what the customers really want. So in my experience, the best teams are the ones that are really solving problems in the same rooms together. And they're actually, surfacing issues and having those conversations early on rather than sort of burying them or maybe, not talking about them for a while and they come back and bite you later. And there's so many examples of like design for manufacturability type things that I've seen. Boston was able to really get all over that early on. A similar sort of thing was happening in joint repair and Smith and Nephew for a while too. And so we had a lot of great success when I was there early on because we were able to co-locate what we called tiger teams, which we really enjoyed. Creating good manufacturing practices is important, but also it's good in the 510K submissions as well, understanding the data and actually getting those in early. So to me, it's like agile teams is about co-localization and trust.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It's a great point. And interesting in today's environment, it's a little harder to do. And
Yes.
I'd say even Terry, I think you're making it sound too simple, by the way, from your past experience. I don't think that engineers don't always naturally just get together, particularly with marketing people, particularly with manufacturing people. That's not always natural. So there's something there that I would say, need to foster or do in order to create that
Yeah.
environment, right?
Yeah. Well, it was so, you're right. It's not that simple. It took years and years and years for that to really take hold over at Boston, but it was a concerted effort that came from the top, that we were going to invest in people to create the environment. Even there was whole rooms built for these agile teams where they were actually supposed to sit together all the time, which does feel a little unnatural for some people, but you have to get used to it. And sometimes you have to take a break and take a walk and that type of thing. But but yes, so after a lot of we created incentives, and we made sure we had local leadership that was really on board. And it was kind of a coveted role to be in, was to be on these teams. And with good ideas coming in from the physicians, we were constantly prototyping and testing and all of that on a regular basis, which it's been clear in the business results, at Boston.
Yeah. And then the tough question is, how do you do that today?
Yeah, right. So since COVID, right, at Baxter, we did a lot of this, and at Laborie, we did a lot of this, where when you are coming to a point where there's something really difficult, a big decision that has to get made, you have to call everyone into the office and actually pay for them to fly from wherever they are. And that's also easier said than done, right? Because for a long time, the travel budgets were cut in R&D for a long, long time, because we thought, well, we're virtual and we did fine, which is true. For a short amount of time, it worked. But then as people move around, the trust level goes away. We had to start flying people in to actually solve problems together. So now you just find these integration points, and then you bring in your partners like Suntra and others to make sure that they're part of the team and they understand the same problems and have the same incentives to solve problems together. It's really a lot about making sure everyone's in it together.
Yeah, great. And we buy a lot of pizza too, by the way.
Right. Lots of pizza.
Very helpful.
Engineers are motivated by pizza in many ways.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. And Terri, I know you, so I can cheat a little bit. You and I have talked a little bit about predictability being important.
Yeah.
And that being a key to being able to move fast, to be able to accelerate. So you've always said predictability is a key factor. And that's different than, say, an emphasis on urgency or resources or just general innovation. Can you tell me what does predictability mean to you in a product development environment?
Yeah. So when the before and after COVID sort of story, what happened was promises that were made by the R&D team, the innovation team to the executives were starting to slip, right? So what the executives really want is a predictable launch cadence so that they can make money the way that they, promised to their bosses, right? To the Wall Street or to the investors, right? So if R&D starts slipping by quarters or even years, sometimes it obviously the trust erodes and it doesn't end well. And so, by becoming predictable, you actually demonstrate competency. In fact, if you're too fast, and I know this has only happened like once in my career that I can remember, the sales force may not be ready. The whole training piece may not be ready. So it really is sort of a dance to make sure that you say what you're going to do and you actually do it. And so, I've always tried to back up to say to the engineers, hey, they're not pushing for you to go faster in a way that's impossible. Really what they're asking you for is what's realistic. And then, as you dig into it, what is the investment that needs to be made to make it realistic if you really don't have confidence in whatever the milestone is. So again, something I learned at Boston, I had a great mentor there, and he said, really, it's all about predictability. And I've noticed, if you look at what Boston's doing, and, this was years ago now, but they always delivered on what they said they would do year after year, quarter after quarter. And it came down to understanding that risk and delivering on it predictably.
Yeah, sounds good. And that's great. One thing I find with predictability is it's hard. So when you're dealing with it in R&D teams, and it's always hard to tell when you're trying to figure out the time that it's going to take or the dollars involved. Are people being too aggressive? Are they being aggressive, appropriately aggressive, which you want them to do, right? You want them to, set a good target, go for it. But in some cases, it just ends up being just aspirational.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How do you
know?
Flesh that out? Yeah. How do you know?
This is the magic, right? Judgment comes from experience. Good judgment comes from making lots of mistakes. So the bottom line is you do have to have experienced people in places that are key. So how do you know? The first thing that starts happening is your test methods start failing or coming close to failing, and you get unexpected results. So when you start to see that in your outcomes, you know that something fundamental is wrong. It's maybe the wrong test method, or people that have never run it before, or you come to find out they've only done one prototype and they've tested it once and they told you it worked. And that is, sometimes it's really expensive to create a prototype and you don't have that much choice, but you have to find a way to like break it down into smaller chunks so that you can understand the level of confidence you have in whatever that outcome may be. And I always try to go back to, so how many times have you actually built it, and how many times have you run this test, and how close were you to failure on the extremes? And then once you understand that, you start picking away at when you failed or came close to failing, why. If you can figure that out through like good root cause, turning it on and off, you're going to be very predictable. Like that's the trick.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I think that I agree with the experience part very much so. I think that's found very similarly. For engineers that have that experience, a lot of times they know how much testing they have to do, or they know how much
Right.
prototyping they have to do to get it right. And it's a little bit of an art, right? Which is also a
Yeah.
little uncomfortable for a lot of engineers.
It
It's
is, and I've never met a team that doesn't want to do well, and I've never met a team that doesn't overestimate their own skill sets. I think they always think, I've done this, it'll be fine. But really, it's the data that speaks. Software is actually the group that I always have to like push a little more, because it's such a quick turn in, prototyping a new
right,
line of code, that usually they feel like we can fix this quick, but the integration piece and then all the testing that comes after that is usually what software developers miss. So you can never take a timeline from a software
right.
developer. Like that is something that I've learned long
Always
ago.
gets more complicated when you put it all together, right?
Exactly.
Um, and maybe another interesting point on the predictability. I think another thing that's kind of counterintuitive is a lot of people think innovation is nonlinear. They
Right.
think you can't really put a timeline on it. You kind of have to experiment and let things go. How does that play against the thought of predictability?
Well, that's true and not true. Like, it depends, I guess, is the best answer. So one way of looking at it is whether or not you're doing sort of a small innovation off of something you already know, or if you have a whole new like customer requirement that's never been done before, and it's a lot more research, right? And so if you're in the upfront where you have no test methods, you've never prototyped it, it's like a fresh thing altogether, that's going to be obviously super unpredictable because you really have no handle around it. I mean, the best scenario is if you're doing something smaller that you fairly well understand, you find an unexpected event, then you're writing your new intellectual property around that, protecting yourself. That's really important. I can talk all day on how to do that.
Right.
And then if
Yeah,
you take that and you make it and you decide that's a new kind of requirement because it's something that is useful, then you can put it back into your process and you've got now a pipeline that's really interesting. But you have to remember that it was unexpected, so you don't know how to control it yet. And that could be on a manufacturing process or some kind of unexpected preclinical event that happened in an animal study or something like that.
yeah. Fascinating perspective, by the way.
Yeah.
The test that doesn't work out, or something that doesn't work out, can turn into intellectual property
Oh,
and more
absolutely. And
intellectual property.
that gets minimized a lot. Like I'm big on look at your outliers, when you were close to failure. Like you had all this, maybe you had all this great nominal data and you've done a test and now you're right on the edge of failure. There was definitely something different about that. So kind of look into it. Like what was it? Because even if it's not a useful accident, it'll come back later when you start manufacturing it, in
Right.
large numbers. So you're going to kind of want to understand that, whatever that
Right.
is.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Um, okay, now I want to talk about something else that you've taught me as well. Um, four P's. Um,
Oh, yes.
so we talked about four P's. And I know sometimes it's hard for me to remember exactly which P is which, but I believe it's so planning, people, process, and projects or programs. Um,
Yep.
can you talk a little bit about what that means and then how you came about that framework?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about, so where I've gone from like different parts of the body when it comes to, devices. And I've always stayed in devices. And I usually get this question people ask me, like, how do you do that? Because you did vascular and you did orthopedics. Like, how do you know? You don't really know it. Like, how do you do it? Everything really comes down to the basics. There's essentially The people that make decisions, they have to have the right skill sets and they have to have the good judgment, right? The processes have to work. They have to enable the engineers to actually do the work. If they're really like pedantic and holding you back, then you got to fix it. Planning is really strategy. You got to have the right projects in mind, which is really, really important, because otherwise you invest incorrectly and then you waste all this money and time and decide that you were working on the wrong thing. And then of course, like the execution of the projects, everyone has to be working together to build the house once you know what you're building. So,
Yeah, right.
all of that's how you can use that framework for even beyond, well beyond R&D. It's always those same things. There's really not much that falls out of it. And so that's just kind of come out over the years. And also there's some basic books written about technology and engineering management, about becoming a level 5 organization, which I talk about a lot. And if you are at the top of your game on every one of those elements, you will definitely be a strategic benefit to your company. And people like will look at you that way, like they did at Boston, like at Bell Labs back in the day, when they were like, this is the R&D team that sets the pace. That's amazing. You want to be that.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds good. And it sounds, again, you make it sound very simple. Um, is this something that kind of evolved for you over time, or is it something that kind of you looking back? How did you come up with the framework?
I think
And
of,
maybe can you talk a little bit how maybe you've used it in the past?
oh yeah. So, I mean, I've read a lot of, business books, and they always seem to go through like the R&D investment and, percent of sales and that type of thing. But I haven't really found good R&D books that talk about the, functionality of it, how you bring the ropes to the ground. So, but over the years, I constantly set goals and objectives, and I always boil it down to those things. So you can set your key performance indicators around the 4 Ps. And I would recommend everyone do it. And if it depends on how much you emphasize each one, really kind of depends on the life cycle of where you are. What a small company might need all of it. A large company might be really great at some things, and like perhaps they're a little weak over here. So you kind of focus on one of the P's if that's what your diagnosis is. And your diagnosis would come from interviewing everybody that you can who has some stake in it. Because everybody, generally your engineers, your coworkers across all disciplines kind of know if you're not going fast enough, why. They kind of know, they can feel it. They just don't know how to fix it, or they don't have the right support, so you'll figure that out quick, and then apply the framework and then get everyone to agree.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting that people generally know what's going wrong or know what the
Yeah.
weaknesses
Yeah.
are. And I think if you ask the right questions, that's how you draw that out, you figure it
Yep.
out. How do you set up environment? Because it's, again, making it sound very simple. Um, but it's got to be the right, safe environment for people to bring up those points, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that question, because most of the time, like, people have tried to make a change and maybe they got their hand slapped for some reason, or something negative happened. So you can chalk that up to psychological stability. Like in R&D, you have to be able to go out on a limb on things that you're not completely sure about, because it's just risky by
Right.
nature. And you will, let me say, make a mistake. I'll make mistakes all the time. My people do all the time. And so the way to make that work is to give them stability. And the way to give them stability is to make them work for each other. I don't know if that makes sense, but back in the day, I used this company that was called Achieve Breakthrough to help me out with something back at Smith and Nephew many years ago now. And when you boiled it down, it was really about one engineer promising to another engineer, or the marketing person promising to the engineer or the sales guy, that they would get you what you needed by a certain time. It seems so simple, but it's so powerful, because if you actually promise that, and that goes for this consulting relationship too. Like if the consultant says, I'm going to get you this by this time, and they do it, then
Right.
you're not going to let them down either. You know what I mean? So once
Right.
you're in there as like a mutual, you want to win together as a team, it's golden. That's like magical when it happens. And it doesn't always happen, but when it does, you can feel
Then
it.
it's good, absolutely,
Yeah.
and it doesn't always happen. And there's I've seen different organizations where they want to make that happen, but then they're kind of stuck for that it not being the standard, not being the
Right.
culture, not being the approach, and
Right.
that's hard. I
That's
don't know
where
if you've ever faced.
the co-localization comes in, and then making sure that the whole team is
Yeah,
in the
yep,
right place at key times. And then actually actually calling out the issues and promising the solutions to each other and understanding like if that didn't work, okay, let's try it a different way, whatever it is. So that's the magic.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So would you say the 4P framework has actually allowed you to go faster? It's kind of a loaded question.
Well, it depends, right? I mean, a lot of times I get sort of parachuted into something it's already happening, right?
Right.
So as a leader, you might start a new job and there's like a key program where your boss is telling you it's going too slow. And so usually that means the damage has already been done when it comes to, going faster because they've already slipped by a year or something. Maybe they've missed a 510(k) submission and they've got to redo the whole thing, I've seen that more than once. And so the only thing you can do in those situations is do the diagnostic of the 4Ps and then try to highlight for the leadership what went wrong based on you have to do it quick when you first start because you're unbiased. It's an unbiased opinion. You bring it up and then you talk about what's the investment that needs to happen to fix it. And it could be, I need expertise that doesn't exist. So you're going to call a vendor or somebody that you trust who has that skill set. You can prove it. And then you can demonstrate, how you might be able to take this risk off the table. I always try to avoid speed conversation. I'll be honest. I try to talk about risk that as much as I can.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
Because the assumption is if you miss something because the risk was high, then it's going to take more time or money or both.
yeah. And Terri, so that brings up a kind of the next question I have is that when you're in that situation where the 510Ks failed, there's questions that have come back, and so obviously that's been delayed, puts you in a different loop. As an R&D leader, you have a lot more to manage than just your team. You have to manage your boss. You have to manage the people around you. You have other people on the leadership team.
Yep.
How do you deal with that situation? Because that's a group that is expecting things to be done faster. And
well, if you're lucky enough to be in there early enough before the submission goes in, my suggestion is always on those things that you're unclear, where your data might be a little weaker and you usually the regulatory person will tell you that. You should have more testing ongoing in the background as much as you can, just duplicative testing, in fact, and that whether that's like a biocompatibility, submission that you've kind of justified, run more biocomp in the background or some other kind of long test. Maybe it's a lifetime test or something like that. You should have the real-time testing going on in the background. So if you're lucky enough to be able to do that, then when the submission comes back, and they say you don't have enough data, you can go, okay, well, I mean, in 2 months, I'll have all of this. So usually that goes pretty well, But if you've come into the middle of it and it's kind of too late to like mediate that way, it goes back to just having a conversation about risk. And then also the other piece that I think is really important is always making sure you look back at your competitors that have something similar and demonstrate where they might have challenges or where they would have gone around the issue, whatever that might be. And that's all you can get data from FDA, through the Freedom of Information Act. That's one way of trying to figure that out, but also just talking to people and trying to demonstrate that this is not easy. And if it was, then, it'd be done already.
Yeah. And you mean to help clarify to the CEO, to the CFO, and to the other people around you and it's a thing that, so I often use the phrase, if everyone could do it, everyone would be doing it. So this stuff is naturally hard.
Yeah.
It's complex and it's hard.
And having conversations with FDA, by the way, just as an aside, as much as you can, I do not believe in hiding from them. You gotta talk to them because they'll tell you what they want to see. And they'll even, if there's things that they're asking you to do that you just can't do or is unreasonable, you can have that conversation with them too. And I've usually been pretty successful helping them understand that testing, we just can't physically do that,
Right.
Yeah.
Usually they want to be helpful. They don't want to try to withhold innovation. They want innovation to happen.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's like some CEOs don't know that, or they just haven't been around it enough to understand that they're not the enemy by any stretch. They're actually most of the time fairly helpful. Now, there has been at FDA specifically, a big sort of change in leadership over there for, many reasons, like a lot of people retired and then, there's a different regime now, but they're still following the same rules. And if you follow them, they want to help. Yeah.
And I think as for a CEO, sometimes it could be a little frightening to say we're calling the FDA to
Yeah.
get an opinion.
Right.
Sounds like maybe we're exposing things too soon. And there's a
Well, you
little
have
bit of risk, but
Yeah, there is a little risk. You have to be strategic about how you do it, and I would suggest in that case you do a lot of role playing with internally, and hire a consultant who has an expertise in this, who's dealt with that part of FDA. That's always a good idea if you feel really if it's super risky. Um, but you have to sort of have somebody in there with good judgment at the top that'll say this one is really difficult. Let's practice.
right.
Yeah,
I love the practice
yeah.
part. That's fantastic. And I also love the experience part. I think that's
Hmm.
in MedTech innovation. I think that, common theme we keep hitting on is it's having the experience and being able to do the pattern recognition
Yeah,
need to is important, but it's also important to have be continually bringing an organization that brings up new talent and developing people and so forth and create that good
yeah,
culture.
for
Uh,
sure.
so looking back and maybe getting back a little bit to the four P's again.
Yeah.
So how um, how did you implement something like the four P's? Do you have examples where that became helpful or helped you get to a root cause of a problem that you're able to fix? How
Yeah.
do you put it in practice?
Well, so I think if you go through it all and you find that there's a big gap, I'm trying to think. I'm trying not to be too specific, but if you find that there's a big gap and you need investment, then you
Mhm.
have to call it out. And I usually framework it like I want the R&D team to be the best in the business, whatever that business is, right? And so I'm talking to boards or whoever my funding guru
Right.
is, finance even, I'm explaining like here's the evidence. Like we have a lot of customer complaints, there's evidence that we don't understand those complaints very well, so we need people who know how to do good root cause analysis. And then depending on what the complaints are around, you might say I'm lacking the skill set, I don't have good systems engineering, or maybe it doesn't exist. you know
Yeah.
or hey, the requirements keep changing. So, and that happens everywhere, by the way. Like it's not one company that does that. Everybody does that because they're like, let me just do a little bit more, and then things change. So you kind of find the
Yeah.
root
Thank you
cause
for
of,
saying that, by the way.
yeah.
We find that constantly.
You Well, now
Which
you're in
is
this position, yeah, where you're constantly getting that right because you're trying to be predictable, and then
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah. But it's like you said, it's a natural part of the
yes,
process.
mm-hmm,
It's natural. You can't possibly know everything up front, and that's where
exactly,
getting back to predictability, it's hard. It's not
right,
easy,
mm-hmm,
but still, you have to. That predictability helps you, but gain the confidence, gain the trust that's needed to
right,
do more.
yeah.
So it's a fine line to walk, to balance.
It is, and the most important piece is to make sure that you help those that control the purse strings truly understand why you need that investment. Because if there's a gap in one of those P's, you're going to need some money to fix it. And there are other things you can do. If you don't have the money to fix it, then you have to think about what might have to go. But in general, I like to try to make the investment conversation top of mind, and then you see how they respond.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, good.
Yeah.
Um, So I'll go back again to knowing Terri from our past conversations that you and I have had. One thing that you've emphasized in the past is defining the end goal clearly and prioritizing the most critical experiments and tests early
Yes.
to de-risk the timeline, cost, functionality, so forth. Why does doing the right work early have such a big impact on predictability? Why is
So
that
if
so
you,
important?
yeah, if you are in a luxurious position of having enough funds to run what I would call technology development, then you're in a really good spot because there's like the R&D piece, the R piece of R&D is really all about not knowing much, right? It's all
Right.
high risk, and so it's upfront. And then there's the product development side of things. That's the piece you want to be predictable because once you go into product development, you're into the phase gates and design controls and all the documentation that you need. So if you can basically identify the killer test methods based on whatever it is you're trying to solve. So first you have to know what the requirement is, right? All of that. And you can run prototyping and testing over and over and over again up front in a place that's not on
Yeah.
the launch books, shall we say, then you'll be in a much better spot because then the risk is reduced. You go into product development and you're really all about creating the right documentation, the manufacturing piece and transferring and all of that. And it should go predictably. Like that is ideal. That's what you're going for. when you
That's
can do it.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Terry, I love that because the thing that so we always face, I'm sure you do the same, is that when you're in those early phases of a program where you are kind of transitioning from the R to the D, and there's still a lot of risk, a lot of times there's a lot of pressure to get out of that early phase of the program and get into the core development
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
And what we typically find is that if you don't spend enough time in that early part, the rest is not going to go well. And the more
Right.
you spend in that early part, then the more you de-risk, the more predictable it becomes, the faster you can go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could look at it from the other side, and I've seen this before too, where the engineers are like trying to make it perfect. So,
Right,
that
right.
happens in software a lot again.
There's
Like,
that too. Right.
yeah, you have to come back and say, this is good enough. Do you understand it enough? And so that the movement from tech dev to product development should be a very important stage gate, an entrance really into product development. And it needs to have a lot of oversight. External engineering expertise is super helpful in that one because people who have done it before maybe bring them in as a consultant, and that this person might be like, well, I'm not so sure that's not as good as you think it is. Go back and do more. Those types of those types of expertise I think are very important in that critical phase because that is what's going to set predictability.
Yeah. So, and how do you make that decision? It, how have you made the decision in the past? 'Cause that's tough, right? It's tough to know when it is the right time, when you do have enough de-risked, enough figured
Yeah.
out that it's ready to move into the next
I mean,
phases.
ideally, it's really if you can set confidence intervals on the outcomes of your testing. I always keep my testing engineers and expertise as close to me as I can, or to somebody I really trust, because if your testers are coming back and they're like, it worked most of the time, but then this weird little thing happened, well, you're not quite there yet. And you know, you have to be able to have the experience. So bringing in experienced people is the best answer, and you can't use AI for that. Not really.
You
you know,
can't, as much as people would love to use AI, you can't. Absolutely
no,
can't. So that's
not
good.
really.
In those situations, how do you know that the team is learning enough in those early stages? So at times, sometimes let's say you see teams that they're doing a lot of experiments. They seem very busy. It's kind of like, okay, they're just one test away from making it work.
Yeah.
And then the next week, it's okay, we're one other test away from making it work. Or
Yeah.
how do you know that they're actually learning the right things, making the progress?
Well, usually if I'm down in the weeds, I can see when an engineer is overconfident or a group of engineers
Yeah.
because
Yep.
they'll tell you that I'll be done next week, and then you ask for the results, and they're like, "Oh, I gotta do it. I gotta do it over again." Now, two things might have happened, right? They could have gotten distracted by some sustaining thing, which happens all the time. You got to try to prevent that because then they're not concentrating. If it's just a small team. The other thing is they did the test and it didn't come out the way they expected, and they're not telling you the results, which is not good. So in
Not that
both
that ever
cases,
happens.
and it does, right? And again, software, it happens all the time, because I'll just make the small change and then I'll try again. In the mechanical side, it's a little harder. It's for that because show me the results, show me the curve, whatever it is. But when you start to see that happening over and over again, then you know that there's something. Usually, it's a skill set is lacking somewhere. There's a skill set lacking. So you either bring in someone from a different part of the organization, an outside firm, or you look for something a little bit bigger or another solution because it's just not working.
Yeah, it makes sense. Love the plug for the outside firm, by the way.
Yeah,
Thank you for
that's
that.
true.
We agree. Yeah. Getting back to, I'm super interested in some of the conversation around culture. And by the way, we'll have a couple of last questions, then we'll open it up to some Q&A. So, um, again, how do you, in all your environments, how have you fostered the ability for people to experiment, ask the right questions, be open about where things are, not saying that, okay, that test result was good, but maybe it wasn't, or something like that.
Right.
How do you foster that?
Uh, it's the way, as a leader, you have to ask the questions carefully and focus on the problem and not the people, which can get really foggy sometimes. So, I spend a lot of time with my leaders. Anybody who's ever worked for me, and I think I saw at least one person on here that did, they'll know that I spend weekly an hour at least with my direct reports as much as possible. And a lot of the times I spend on the 4 Ps, but also like, how is so-and-so doing with this? And, you really have to get after that to make sure that people feel supported. That's really all it's ever come down to. Of after all these years, people in general, you have to assume like they want to do well. And if they have a strength to do the thing that you've asked them to do, when they fail, they're going to feel shame and sadness, right? It's just a human part. So
Right.
you just get in there and try to understand like what's motivating them to not tell you something, or what do they avoid that experiment? Like, what are they afraid of? And you'll find there's a history there where something's happened. So you got to be like part therapist sometimes to try to figure out like how to pull that out of people, and then either give them help or say, listen, I want you to do this. I expect you're going to fail, but I want to see the results. Like, I just need to know.
Yeah.
So it's those kinds of day-to-day interpersonal interactions between boss and supervisor, but also, as I mentioned before, if the team's working there for each other, and let's say the regulatory person is waiting for a result from the R&D person that they have to put in the submission, and they need it now, and it doesn't work, well, they can start working together with the quality people, like together, to get that output, if that makes sense. Like, we're going to be
Yeah.
doing a test, we're going to try
Right.
this analysis, and then you're well on your way. But it's important that when the team works like that, then you're good to go. It's going to be fine. You might be a little bit late here and there, but generally speaking, you're going to deliver. So
Yeah. And I love your observation. People generally, they're trying to do a good job.
yeah, they're
Not
always
even
trying.
generally,
Yeah.
always. And it's a really important thing to remember. At Centra, we have something we call assume positive intent,
Yeah.
which we espouse pretty heavily, which is it always assume, the people who they're trying to do their best. And if there's something that's not going right, it's not the person typically, there's something else that needs to be uncovered
Right.
and resolved.
Right. Exactly. And actually in leadership, and this because you and I have had these great conversations as we work together in the past about what's going on with projects. And it almost always comes down to something going on interpersonal, or, something's going on with this person at their home even. And you gotta figure out how to help them,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, one last topic to touch on, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And that's something that we haven't spent a lot of time talking in the conversation that I think you're particularly good at through all of your experiences, which is manning the expectations of the executive team
Yeah.
that's above you and around you. Um,
Yes.
any advice or tricks, or how do you keep them on board through sometimes very complicated situations that are
Yeah.
hard for others to understand when they're not part of R&D, they're not part of the engineering team, they're not necessarily technical.
Yeah. Well, and I've been successful in many cases, but I haven't always been successful. I mean, I'll be the first to admit. And I guess I look at my supervisor and my peers as executives, or in one-ups or whatever it is, in similar ways as I do the people that work for me. And that is open communication, trying to understand their intent. So for example, if I come in and I do my first analysis, just joined the job, and I say, you know what, there's a problem with this particular process that we have to fix. So I'm going to have to work with quality to try to remove this requirement or add it over there. And it turns out my boss is the one that told them to do it.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I've stepped in that one before, where you're like, this is terrible, we have to fix this. And and this person might be like, well, that was my idea. And then you realize, oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, hang on a minute, let me reel that back in, because people don't want to be told they're wrong, especially not in front of large groups of people. So you have to be mindful, I'd say, of what it is you're trying to fix. And it's not that you're going to back away from it, but you at least need to be a little bit more careful about how you frame it for them. That's politics. Like, it is what it is, and it exists everywhere. So
Yeah.
understanding like who's accountable and responsible for things as you want to come in and make changes, and then just carefully making sure that you do the things that you can do quickly for your people. But also, if there are bigger changes, then you're going to have to do a change management process. That's an up and down and sideways thing. And that takes time and effort. You have to be consistent. That's
Right.
the
Right.
answer.
Always. Very
Yeah.
good. Okay. All right, Terri, we have a bunch of
I
questions.
see it. I
So,
love it.
so why don't I just start going down through the list? And so I'll start with, so there is one on IP, after IP expiration. I'm actually going to, for the person who asked that question, and looks like it is directed at Suntra. Maybe I'll take that separately offline if you want to provide your email, and I can follow up with you and we can talk about that if that's okay. Next one, we have one that says, going back to your point of predictability, during the peri-COVID and pre-ChatGPT period of high VC activity in biomed tech, the glory years, you can see
Yes.
startups rightly responding to investor pressure with accelerated timelines, but then fail to deliver on promises.
Yep.
Sounds very true. Do you think investors are now changing their behaviors to reflect the reality that good medtech products will take time? Similarly, how are big medtechs like Boston Scientific adjusting their M&A strategy? So that's a really good
That's a
question.
great question. In fact, I don't know. So first of all, I don't know what Boston's doing around M&A strategy because I'm not there and I wouldn't be able to say if I was, to be honest. But I was just going to say that I think my experience is, are investors changing their behavior to reflect reality about good medtech products? For organic internal development, I would say no. They still want it fast, and like they're not changing their mind about that because that's, again, they want predictability. They want to know what they're getting. But what I think they are doing is that they are looking external to buy more companies. Like there is a lot of money around to buy more companies, and I'm seeing that all. I mean, you could see it. It's in the open, really. It's everywhere. And so what that means for R&D leaders is now you're part of the diligence process, which is really important because again, and like let's take private equity. Any private equity firm can buy a smaller firm, because they have the money. They have a lot of money, but there's going to be risks with each acquisition, and your job as an R&D leader is to say like it'll work, but you're going to have to invest in this and this during the integration. So it's really just a matter of helping them understand what the risk is. And, if they're going to buy something that's exactly like what you're doing like developing internally, like don't take it personally. They just want to go faster. And they're just going to end up buying in something with different risks. So you'll just have to adjust to that.
Right.
So I think that's the
Exactly.
best answer to that question.
Yeah, good. I love it. Okay, next we have another question. And by the way, people ask the questions. If we didn't quite get a good enough answer
Right.
for you, just feel free to chime back in. We have one. Terri, you mentioned co-locating marketing, engineering, and manufacturing. In your experience, is it important to include regulatory and maybe business finance people on the real-time team, or can they just come in as needed?
Regulatory for sure, like without a doubt, they're probably one of the most important people. Clinical too, if
Yeah.
that's not part of R&D, like your clinical people need to be involved. I have always enjoyed really close connections with business and finance people. If you mean by business, like upstream marketing, yes, they're part of the innovation team for sure. Finance, definitely, because you need to get a net present value calculation together for the return on investment. You have to do that like early on because not all the ideas are going to make money. So that those finance people need to understand your technology enough to be able to answer questions when you're not in the room, because believe it or not, they will, and they'll do it all the time.
Right.
So co-locating them is ideal, but finance I've noticed is usually not co-located, but they need to be in it, for sure.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one is a quote. It is good enough. So there was a comment during
It was,
the conversation. So then someone asked a question, just clarification. What was the fourth P? People,
It's
process, planning,
project.
and
Yeah.
project.
Which is basically execution. I was trying to get some alliteration in there to help you remember it, but yeah, it's execution of the projects.
Project. Good.
Yeah.
And next one. Good questions, by the way, everyone. How do you manage expectations with your management? How do you tell them we're moving too fast?
Well, I usually don't.
Meaning,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, almost never tell them we're moving too fast. I think I'd usually say there's more risk that we need to mitigate. If it's and the one that sells it the most is safety, like patient risk. If you, as an R&D leader, I feel like paramount above all. If you see a safety risk and the data is too scant around that, which your quality and regulatory folks will never let you get away with, but if you see it and they don't, you have to raise your hand and say that immediately. Usually that's not the issue. It's usually something that's just off the safety list, more about a customer complaint or something that isn't going to hurt or harm a patient. And then that's when you just have to come back and say, I need to understand this better, and you give them the reason why. Because if I don't, then the patient or the customers are going to complain about the delivery device or the software is not quite right. And if they tell you they still want to go, you can, but you have to make sure that you keep highlighting that you're going to end up coming back and fixing this later. It is a way that you can talk about going faster, but you have to make sure that they understand that if you fix it now, it'll be a better product in the end, because a competitor can just come knock you off because your device is not performing very well. And you know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yep. Good question. And yeah,
Yeah.
Terry, love it because that's a very common situation. Um, we have one. Do you have any suggestions when you've traveled too far down the road?
I think that's the same answer. It depends on what you mean by that. Like if you gone too far down the road on a risky product, that one is a non-starter. Like just raise your hand and say we shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. And Terry, that actually brings up an interesting question I have for you. Have you been in a time where you've come in and you've realized the project is too far down the road and you've had to backtrack or pull it
Yes.
back into an earlier phase or something
Yes.
like that?
Actually, yes. I'm trying to think of well, I probably shouldn't get too specific, but yes, actually, I did take a product in Baxter actually backwards one. It was not a popular thing to do, but I
That's a
just,
hard one to sell for sure,
it was
but
hard to sell.
sometimes it can be really important.
It was hard to sell. I mean, in the end, we recovered and the product's out there now and it's good. It's a really good product, but you know, you have those political chips and sometimes you have to spend them. And so, you know, because if you just tell your team like to keep going, and they know, and you know that it's never going to happen, then you start losing credibility. So you can't do that either.
Right.
You know?
Um, Next one. It's a great discussion, Bryan and Terry. Thank
Yeah.
you. The term innovation has been mentioned several times, which is true. Interested to know from each of you, what is your definition of innovation?
Well, Paul, I know Paul well, and I love this question because I know he already has an answer in mind. I mean, there is of course intellectual property that is the idea and getting the patent on it, but that's not that's not the only thing about innovation, right? It's about being able to make something that people want to buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, that's the simplest. I don't know what you think, Bryan.
Yeah. So, yeah, but Paul, good question. I think in this context, this discussion, that's more of what certainly I meant. And it's around the product innovation, having a product that has something about it that's innovative out in the marketplace, in its actual use. When we talk about innovation at Suntra, we also talk about process innovation a lot. So it's
Yeah.
around how do we, this may be a different topic for a different call, but yeah, how do we do things better? Do we do things faster? A lot of times that is million incremental innovations that we try to capture and use better so we do better the next time. But a lot of that is kind of the innovation. And by the way, another plug for Suntra. When we talk about innovation, we also, part of what we do is we like to provide that innovation that we've uncovered, that process innovation with our partners, with our clients. We feel that's very important and in terms of the relationship that we have with you.
That's huge, actually. I'm really glad you mentioned that because, yeah, that's how you go faster is when you have the process that works.
Yeah. Um, okay, next we have, where have you used AI tools successfully in PM or engineering to accelerate projects or reduce effort costs?
Yeah, so for me, I did this in a couple of places, and it's funny that everyone talks about AI, but you know, the development of algorithms has been around forever, right? We all know that. It's just the speed at which you're able to do it has gotten crazy fast. But I did it in two places where a lot of the engineers will complain about old data, like because it's in a different system, I can't pull it up, it's not easy to search. So in at least two firms, I've been able to develop algorithms to help search with like natural language back into your old data. And I think that is huge because if you mine that correctly, you can lead to all kinds of new things, including, you know, going faster and sustaining, but also, you know, customer complaints and that type of thing. Like you can look all that up much more quickly than before. And that saves like weeks, which leads to months. That's huge.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of Suntra, another long conversation. I can tell you the AI tools that are available for engineering, particularly software, no surprises
Yeah.
there, are changing constantly. The way that we were using AI tools a year ago, 12 months ago, is night and day compared to the
Yeah.
way that we're using them now. And it's helping us in many ways to both go faster, to de-risk, which is what a lot of people don't think about the AI tools in terms of de-risking, but it helps us identify where there might be some risks that we didn't identify. And then helping certainly in PM, helping the way that we pull projects together, identifying where there might be issues or things hidden that we haven't seen before. So a whole lot of stuff going on. It is constantly evolving. I think this is a really exciting time to be in product development in the world of AI.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm excited about it. You can do a lot more with less for sure. It's true. But you got to have good judgment.
Always
Yes.
goes back to the expertise part.
Yep. Yep.
Um, okay, next, do you have any advice on managing expectations on new internal development against M&A or distribution options that often have perceptions of being faster, easier, and less expensive?
Yeah. So when I was at Covidian way back, that's when I led technology development. I started a group from scratch. And I talked about this a lot because tech dev is good for the early work that we talked about, but it's also really, really good for M&A because if you bring in a product and you start doing diligence, you can have enough wherewithal to know whether that technology is really better than yours. And now you have to be careful about confidentiality and that kind of stuff. Like there's some creative, there has to be a wall, but in general, I would say it's important to be somewhat knowledgeable in the space that you're buying things in. And if you're not, then you need to hire somebody who is, like an external consultant to help you out, physician, whatever, or engineering firm, of course. That's my advice is you have to know what you're looking at because if you just you really can't take their word for it. I mean, they're trying to sell it to you. So they're biased. They're going to show you the best side. You really need to have something to measure it against. That's my answer there.
Yeah, and yeah, good answer, Terry. And I mean, who hasn't been surprised
Yeah.
after you bought the company
Right.
and gotten under the covers?
Yeah.
It's hard. It really is
Yeah,
hard.
it
Yeah.
is.
Okay, next question we have, other than making this webinar required watching, okay, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
What is the fastest way to deal with forcibly educate non-technical or wrong field clients who think
Yeah.
they understand tech, demand Gantt charts, PowerPoint updates, etc., even when the best update is the engineers are very busy and you can't Gantt chart your way to success with novel hardware R&D?
Well, so
Question?
Nevin, I think you're saying two things at once. It sounds like the engineers are very busy. That means they're probably not spending the time on the task that you need them to spend it on because they're not meeting their timelines in the Gantt charts. It sounds like it's a time management problem and the way you framed it. But how to educate the people that aren't engineers, because that is the hardest part, is data. You got to capture the data. Like, are the people working on the tasks that you expect them to? Why is it that the timelines keep changing? What's the root cause? And then you just reflect that back. And you can put it in layman's terms. Like you have to simplify it because they're not going to understand, the details of the test method. But you could say, I got to have this test method passing to make it to the next thing. And I failed it. Why did I fail it? And then you explain it.
Yeah, good. Okay. We're actually starting to run short on time.
I
Probably have
know.
enough time for one or two questions, and I really like the next one. I often find that there isn't a shared urgency to develop new products across departments. Engineering is being held to schedules, and you can kind of get the rest. But what are some suggestions to be successful in that kind of environment where not everyone is on the same page, doesn't have the same priorities?
And it happens over and over again everywhere. Like everywhere I've been, there's always a group that doesn't have the same priority level or something. And that comes down to KPIs. So you all have to have a shared KPI for whatever it is that you're trying to get done, whether that's project or sustaining, and it has to be driven from the top, a KPI that makes sense, translated by each leader. And then those leaders need to be in contact with each other. That is hard, especially in larger companies, like, because you might be in completely different states and you might not get it right every time. But if it's really important to the business, you should be able to take shared KPIs and drive it that way. Meaning you get paid, you get bonus, you get paid off of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And I find if you don't have that shared alignment through some KPI is the best way to drive clear
Right.
alignment.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that alignment, there's not much you can do.
Right. Exactly. Let's see. Where
Okay.
are we?
Do you have time for one more?
I'm up for it.
Okay, Terry, you want to pick one?
Co-location.
We got a couple. Kind of did co-location. Last one is more risk, mentioned doing more R, so the D is more predictable.
Yeah. I mean, for co-location, if you're not in the same place, travel to the same place at important times. That's kind of the answer there. Doing more R than this makes work. Yeah. I mean, I think Simon, it's a statement. Objective data to help convince your leaders. There's a bunch of books that are good out there for how much money is spent on R&D as a percent of sales and what it leads to, and look at vitality index. You can kind of get that data off of probably Claude or Copilot. Try to use comparators. That's the best way to answer that question.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good way. And if you're talking to the executive team, I got a great book for you, How Big Things Get Done,
yeah,
that I preach regularly, by the way, as a different
yes,
topic, but definitely speaks at the executive level about why those things are so important.
super.
Okay,
I think we
great.
did it.
Right on
Yes,
time.
awesome. Thank you. We appreciate it, Bryan and Terri, for sharing your insights today. As you can tell with the amount of questions, the group was super engaged, and I think everyone received the information really well and have some awesome takeaways from today. I just wanted to remind everyone that you will be receiving an email in the next day or so with the webinar recording, so you can view that or pass it along to colleagues and friends. And thanks again for joining us today. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.